Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now we will begin the special session, Young Innovators. First of all, I'd like to introduce two moderators for this session. First of all, Mr. Vali Musa, ICEF Steering Committee, Deputy Chairperson of the Presidential Climate Change Commission, former President, International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources. And Ms. Sakano Akira, ICEF Steering Committee, Representative Director, Zero Waste Japan, Co-founder, Green Innovation Director and CSO, Ecomic Company Limited. And now I would like to ask Mr. Musa to moderate this session. Mr. Musa, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. In addition to the two people that have been introduced, we will be having a panel made up of 4 people. Akira next to me is doubling up. She's both a moderator and she's a panelist. So she has two hats in here. And then we have Shi Chen, who you've already heard yesterday, who is a postdoc from Carnegie Science. We have Maria Carter, who is online, and she's the CEO of Lumora Technologies. And then we also have Joko Tri Rubianto from Indonesia that you have already been introduced to yesterday. So, so welcome everybody. You may be wondering how come they asked me to moderate this panel of young people. It's only because I'm so young at heart. Unlike my fellow steering committee members, they took a vote on who is the youngest at heart in the steering committee, and I won. So that's how I became the moderator here. But I've asked the panelists deliberately not to give us a prepared slide presentation and to give us a prepared talk, but rather to talk from the heart. They have spent 2 days with us. They have interacted with us. They've seen us and all of those sorts of things. And the question that I'd like to put to you is, if you were a little more influential than you are right now, and if you were able to impact on the direction of the UNFCCC, if you were able to impact on the direction of governments, of the big business, etc., what is realistically, what is the kinds of things that you would emphasize on over and above what is being done now? So in a sense, to imagine that you do have greater influence. Later on, I would, and you could do it as part of this also, is that in your view, do you think that the younger generation sees the question of climate change any differently from the older generation? Taking into account that the older generation, they know deep down in their hearts that they will not be around when the worst impacts of climate change are manifest, but the younger generation know that they are. When we open up for discussion, I'm only going to allow younger people to participate, and I see that there are a few young people in the audience. Prepare yourself. You can either ask a question or just say, make a comment. And remember, when I say younger, younger is a self-definition. If you consider yourself to be young, you will be allowed to participate in the discussion then. Akira, over to you.
Thank you very much. And then thank you everyone for this quite open discussion opportunity in the last part of this ICEF 2024. Anyway, so to respond to Vali's question, which is, we consider this is quite a challenging or big question, I'd say. Probably I start with like a little bit of my background, and then I try to reach to the response. So I myself normally work with local communities and local governments. to try to implement waste reduction or resource circulation project policies at the very local ground. So for example, like myself, sometimes make charcoal by myself as a pilot project, or I also make like organic waste circulation in the composting with the soil and something like that. At the same time, we try to connect the community level activities to the local policy and sometimes with national policy and so on. So that's my background. And then coming from that, I'd say first of all, like the local challenges or local solutions, I would say, that we are already tackling, sometimes are not highlighted at all as maybe good practices. And then especially what I feel here in Japan is that maybe, one project succeeds in a rural community, and then some people recognize that, media says that this is great, but they don't learn from it. So, like people say, excuses, this is possible because X, Y, Z, and then like they don't learn from it. So first of all, I'd love to kind of, point out that there's always something we can learn from whatever you actually see or hear or, what's going on in the world. So how can we actually, recognize the learnings from case studies even in the small community level? And then that's what, first of all, the policymaker really needs to understand. So that's what I'm already actually doing. But on top of that, first of all, I would say, right now, even if we make small changes in the local ground, it's really difficult. When we talk about yesterday, global governance has already maybe been not succeeding or even failing. And then I don't think that the same structure could actually solve anything, even for the future at this point. So if I win the power at some point, then I would firstly start maybe pricing up the critical materials. It's not only the critical like minerals or already pointed out materials, critical in the sense of maybe, for example, plastics, or maybe something that's very critical in a way for affecting our climate change. So something like that could also influence maybe the system boundaries of how much materials we can actually use, how much material we can actually choose to be supplied, and so on. So that kind of like starting point of pricing is what I'm normally not doing as myself, but probably I would start pointing it out from my side. But anyway, I will pass it down to my my co-speakers, and then Maria from online. Maybe you can take.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay?
Yeah, no, it's perfect.
Thanks so much great. Thanks so much for having me back, and thank you to the moderators for kicking off the panel. It's really nice to be included again, but also really lovely to be here with some of my fellow young people, I guess. That's how we can describe it. So I think the question that was posed is sort of, if we were more influential in government or similar organizations, how would we want to engage with them to motivate young people around the world to better engage with climate change as sort of the existential crisis of our generation? I'm from the United States. I grew up in a rural part of New Mexico, which is a very unpopulated state between Texas and Arizona. And I moved to Philadelphia when I went to university. I spent many years living in Philadelphia, and I moved to China for about a year, and then to Washington, D.C., and then to San Francisco. And the reason I give sort of like a geographic background is to provide a little bit of context from my perspective on this, which is that there are far more things in common among young people around the world and around just very different communities than there are different. But that's not always apparent. And I think what I have heard from many people in my generation, and I'll be curious how my fellow panelists feel about this, but what I've heard from many people from all different walks of life is that climate change feels like this sort of insurmountable, intractable, existential challenge that we all face. And it feels so big that maybe you don't know where to start with your individual actions. And there's lots of important roles that government and intergovernmental organizations can play in sort of a top-down approach to bringing the policy changes that need to happen in order to create lasting institutional change to tackle this at a high level. But I think my answer to the question really actually comes from the bottom up rather than the top down. And what I would do if I had that kind of influence is encourage cooperation and community building among groups of young people from all different parts of not just the world, but different, even within the same country. I think there's a lot of opportunity for young people to feel a sense of motivation and feel a sense of purpose in tackling some of the more acute challenges that they face. For example, right now in the United States, we are dealing with the worst hurricane season on record. There's currently a hurricane sweeping through the state of Florida. Several weeks ago or months ago, a very large hurricane passed through the Carolinas, including large communities that are hundreds of miles inland. Texas has been hit multiple times by large hurricanes this year. And so when people think about how climate change is affecting them, it is becoming more acute in terms of both weather patterns and sort of day-to-day interruption of their lives. And that's not unique to the United States. It's not unique to Europe. It's not unique to Africa. It's not unique to Asia. It's not unique to any part of the world. And I think there's a lot of good that can come from allowing people or enabling people and encouraging people to work together on common issues, even though they may come from very different places. There's a lot of power in that sort of bottom-up movement, just as much as there is in the top-down policy changes that can enact really big sweeping things. I think there's a lot of potency in having both at the same time. And I know there's a lot of work that's being done on this in various pockets around the world, but I think from an intergovernmental perspective, it's really something that can have outsized, lasting impact, particularly between people in countries who otherwise wouldn't have as much communication and exchange. But like the great spirit of innovation is to bring people with diverse backgrounds together to work on a common problem. And climate change is that. It's the ultimate common problem that we all share. So I'll pause there and let my fellow panelists give their thoughts. And then maybe we can come back to the question of how younger folks view this problem as different from maybe the older generation. I have definitely some thoughts on that as well.
Thank you, Maria. I definitely would love to support what you just mentioned. Just one comment, also from my side, that, for example, right now, lots of companies or lots of opportunities, including here, they are trying to put young people on the stage to ask for comments and ask for inputs. But sometimes younger generation are not prepared for it, sadly. We are trying right now, but and then, for example, in Japan, like sometimes when high school students goes to university, and then once you become a university student, somehow you are put in the position and say, hey, you are the young person. You must have new ideas rather than us. Then like comment something, but like we are not educated in the way to think that, bring up with the ideas. We are not trained that way. Then, of course, we are making efforts, but at the same time, how can, as a society, educate as a whole for the younger people to be equipped to be on the same stage to start discussing is another topic I'd love to put it up. But yeah, before taking note over,
absolutely.
Please pass it.
No, lots of thoughts on that as well, but maybe we can come back to that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. So let's pass it on to, maybe Joko first. Yeah.
Okay. Before answering the big questions from Musa, I would like to share about my background. So maybe my background here is just totally different with you guys here, because I'm from agri-food system, while from yesterday we are talking about renewable energy, about hydrogen, and that is good. I mean, for me, I learned a lot about what is actually renewable energy. I just know about like hydrogen. Okay, hydrogens, that's a renewable energy. But how is the politics behind, like how is currently happening, and how is the progress of our Earth tackling this kind of issues? So I work on the Youth Policy Board as in the World Food Forum. the World Food Forum is an independent youth-led organization facilitated by the UN FAO that was published in 2021. So regarding the questions that Mr. Musa said, it is also related to what Maria said regarding the community development on giving also like training. This is a big thing that I think we need to urge more, especially for the global South countries, for the developing countries, and especially indigenous and rural communities, that young people there are not well trained. And the big problem is that they sometimes did not go to schools. They didn't have good educations. That's a big problem that we need to fix. When we talk about the sustainability in agri-food system, as we know that in agri-food system that from agriculture productions to processing to distribution and also to consumptions, it actually makes more than 1/3 of greenhouse gases globally. It's quite a number in contributing to the greenhouse gases. So that's why I am really glad to be here to speak up as a person who have a background in agri-food system to contribute to the ICEF, to make sure that the agri-food system is not left behind in progressing about the environmental issues worldwide. And when we talk about the power of young people, currently more than 26% of global populations are the Gen Z, the Generation Z. So just like me, we are sometimes questioning why were we born on this kind of earth that already, we can say, a little bit having environmental degradations. Why were we born on this kind of era where environmental issues are happening? We cannot choose that. But yeah, we need to face it, and that's why it is important if I become like someone that is influential, it is important to combine two things. The first is about the development, the human development, especially for young people in educations, in understanding like how is actually doing an innovation and research to support the sustainable and climate resilience. And the second one is about the infrastructure, especially in the developing countries and rural areas, that sometimes, mostly in agriculture sector, we were still using like the old methods of agriculture system. So that's why yesterday I told you about the lack of interest from young people to join the agri-food system because of that. That's why it's important to bring this kind of maybe smart technology, precision agriculture to this kind of topic. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having me in this session. And this is called Young People. So maybe I'm not young in my age, but I'm currently a postdoc. So definitely I'm young in my academic career. So I would like also to give an introduction of my background. I'm currently a postdoc at Carnegie Science, so maybe not a lot of people know this. So this is an institution in the US. The headquarters is in Washington, DC, but it has different branches across different parts of the US. So currently I'm based at Stanford University. So since my PhD, I'm working on renewable energy, like how to achieve a better synergy of renewable power with the sustainability goals, as well as like how to avoid the future risks in renewable energy development. So I'm an energy person, so actually I'm also very grateful due to the ICEF meeting. I learned a lot about other sectors, like including the food and agriculture yesterday. So, and also for the question, like if I can be more influential, what I would like to encourage to do. So I think firstly, I would say probably I want more stable and more harmonized leadership in the governance, because currently, as we all know, like some countries, some regions, they have kind of unstable policies regarding the climate change. But we also learned from yesterday, like the challenge of climate change has never been such urgent. So there is no room for us to wait or to retract on our progress. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is I would like to encourage as much as possible regarding the policies to promote all these low carbon and even negative carbon technologies, because I think like the solar photovoltaic is a great example. I think nobody knows, like after several decades of development, solar power could now be so cheap, even cheaper than the fossil fuels, so the market can run itself. So that could be attributed to a lot of encouragement from different countries, either from the tax rebate, from the feed-in tariffs. So although from the initial stage, we need to investment a lot of money's capitals inside that, but I think the reward is quite rewarding and worthwhile for us to do such kind of investment. And I think after the technology, I would want to say probably technology is important, but that's not the only thing. Because currently, as Joko just mentioned, like for the rural areas, for the underrepresented communities, even if take solar the example as well, like although solar power technically should be cheaper enough, should be very cheap, but people are not using that in Africa, in Middle East countries. Why? So because there is a lot of technology development gaps there. People don't know how to investment in this low carbon technology. There is no capitals flowing into that. And there will be many local challenges. For example, there are regional conflicts. So people are not willing to invest their capitals into all these regions. So all these challenges are not about technology, but more about like human factors, like the financial sector, like the political sector, and even the cultural sector. I think all these questions need to be solved. And I think the last point I want to share is that probably if I'm more influential, I would like to embed more like public awareness into the climate change mitigation, because I think people are now observing more and more like hurricanes, as we've seen recently, and the wildfires in California, in Canada regions. So, but I think less is known is that why these things are happen very frequently, and what's the relationship with the climate change. I think there are a lot of climate scientists who could offer answers to the public, and I think that's the both the governmental role and also the scientific role to truly let the public know what's happening now, so to increase their public awareness. And also I think like for the education, like from very young we know we need to do the recycle of the materials, we need to save the water, but I think the climate change education is also equally important for the education of different students and different ages. So from the very young age, we need to understand like climate change is a very focal challenge for now, and we need to act from our personal behavior change. Like we need to take public transportation, we need to like reduce our travels, and also we need to change our dietary habits. So all these I think need to do to be embedded in the public education. I think that's all I want to share.
Anyone wants to jump into other one's comments? If not, may I actually ask Vali? Because if you were in our generation now, what would you say as the same response to your question? Because you could, maybe, you could repeat again.
I will answer your question, but Maria mentioned that she wanted to also respond to the second part of my question, which maybe you can all respond to, and that is just inform the House here. How do you think young people see this question of climate change? Do they see it any differently from the way we see it? And how do they see it? The people that you interact with, what is your view? Obviously you're not experts on young people, but you are young people, and maybe each of you can just comment on that a little bit. Whoever wants to start, or you could start.
I can go ahead and start. I certainly won't claim to know what all young people think or feel about this, but perhaps I can share a little bit of perspective as somebody who works every day with lots of people who are thinking about renewable energy and climate change specifically. I have to agree with Joko. I think, he said something to the effect of many young people, especially those in Gen Z, ask themselves, like, why was I born at this time in history? There's a common joke among millennials that we're very tired of living through once-in-a-generation events every 5 to 10 years. In the United States, we lived through the global financial crisis in 2008, and then we lived through very tumultuous political times. Now we have increasing conflicts and wars breaking out all over the world. We have the existential threat of climate change. And so the way that I would characterize some of the feelings of the young people, at least that I know, is just a bit of exhaustion, a bit of fatigue with the latest catastrophe du jour, to be a little bit cheeky about it. And I think there's a little bit of cynicism woven into it as well, in that we've looked for many generations to big institutions to help solve these kinds of problems that feel intractable and that feel like the kind of thing that big institutions could solve. But climate change has so many faces. The agricultural sector, as Joko mentioned, the renewable energy sector, as she mentioned, there's lots of issues related to water. There's lots of issues related to weather pattern changes. There's so many different facets that it's very easy to become overwhelmed. And unfortunately, one of the common symptoms of being overwhelmed is apathy. But the urgency of climate change doesn't wait for the apathetic to become the motivated. And so I think that there's really, I won't speak to how maybe older generations feel about it, but I think that the younger generation definitely has a few different camps. I think there's people who feel very motivated to solve it or to work towards a solution. I would probably put myself and the other people on the stage in that group. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here. And then I think there's also a group who is sort of uncertain about what to do and maybe finds that a bit paralyzing. And unfortunately, that's a very reasonable perspective, because it's very hard to know what to do. You can use less water or recycle your aluminum cans, but it's very hard to battle the cognitive dissonance that you see in your own personal actions with lots of trends around the world that are running counter to those kinds of things, which would be positively affecting climate change. And so I think that's what breeds the cynicism that a lot of young people feel. So I know that's a bit of a sad answer, but I think that's at least honestly what I have observed and what I have heard from many people in my generation. But I'd be curious what the other panelists have to say.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Yeah, what I see just now regarding like the Gen Z are questioning themselves, like, why were we born on this kind of era? But at the same time, there are actually a lot of young people, and the survey says that more than 72% of the Gen Z are willing to shift their lifestyle to be more sustainable. This is a good sign. So I think it's kind of a process. Maybe what I can like mapping is like black, gray to white. The black one is like the one, the young people who are still like questionings. They are actually don't know anything about what is happening. And that's why it is important to have kind of human development, like giving a training for young people, provide capacity building there to shift from the black into the gray, and until they create actions to the white zone. So I think it's kind of a process. I don't want to like separate them like this is like the pessimistic, this is the optimistic. No, I think it's a process that we need to consider to make sure that the world is to be more sustainable.
I absolutely agree with these two panelists, their opinion. Actually, I feel like if you interview young people in the road, you say, do you care about climate change? I think like most people, they will say yes. But I think currently there is a lacking of the mechanism, like how to let the young people to truly involve in the campaign. So I think like currently, for example, we all know like we need to change our transportation. Probably we will need to phase out the fossil fuel cars. We will need to use EV cars or fuel cell cars. But actually currently the market is not very mature. So we need to kind of to create the market for the young people so they could to vote using their actions. Like for example, like and currently I'm in California. So California, they use a lot of electric cars like Tesla. But when I talk to my friends, they will say, if I travel outside of California, probably I won't use that because there are not a lot of infrastructures. It's hard to recharge the EVs there. So all these questions now exist. So I think it's truly need to, like the synergy of the policy of the technology and market to truly create an environment to truly evolve in all these young people. And I definitely believe like all these young people are willing to make contributions to the campaign.
Yes, so from my side, I also super agree. And then, so right now when I'm based in Japan, I'm in the, society where younger population is so less than the rest. And then right now I'm 35 years old, and then I'm considered quite young here in the community, but not in the world. Yeah. Then when I actually joined one of the community, which is called Global Shapers Community by the World Economic Forum, the statement of the Global Shapers Community, which is the young community of the forum, was that, okay, half of the world population is under 27 years old. That was a statement back in 2010 or 11 when the community was established. And I was shocked. If that's the case, well, younger population has the power of voting. We have the power of consumption, as we just mentioned, and we can actually change the society. Yeah, but that's not the feeling that I can really feel here. And then that's why I super agree with the empowerment, education, everything with the younger people. But still, for example, I'm running a program called Green Innovator Academy. Then this every year we open up the application for university and postgraduate students, and then we receive so many applications. They want to learn more about what they can do. They want to open up their views. Of course, some of them already learn at the school, but at the same time, they also want to learn from the practitioners who are here, who's actually doing something in the very front. So we receive so many applications. We choose 60 to 100 of them every year. Then we try to provide opportunities for them to directly discuss and make a dialogue with us. And at the same time, we choose like different field for them to actually try to provide the policy proposal or business proposal to the stakeholders. Then after 6 months, they actually decide themselves to, dive into, for example, one of the local communities or one of the, rural municipalities, and then they actually start, contributing proactively towards the solving the cause. So this kind of like opportunity is definitely meaningful, but at the same time, definitely how can we fasten that, or the procedure to catch up with the emergency speed is always really, kind of tackles me sometimes to pause at certain points. So that's kind of my view.
So let's open it up to the audience. I'm looking for a hand. And while we're waiting for that, I see there's a question here online. How can we ensure equal opportunity for each and every section of society, including indigenous communities, through intangible cultural heritage mechanisms which involves latest technology as well? This is a deep question. I'm happy I don't have to answer the question, but I'll just read it again. How can we ensure equal opportunity for each and every section of society, including indigenous communities, through intangible cultural heritage mechanisms, which involves latest technologies as well. Whoever wants to tackle that? Joko?
Yeah. So in my organizations, in the World Food Forum, we have the Innovation Lab. So it's basically where we are engaging with the young people worldwide, and we are prioritizing people, like young people from developing countries, from the global south. So we have several programs that specifically for students, for example, and we have specifically for young researchers, like we call it the transformative agriculture research challenge. And we have also the youth food lab that is actually a kind of a mentorship between the young people to the experienced one. I don't want to say like old people, like someone that is more experienced about the things that they are doing right now, especially in doing action in the agri-food system. So I think that's actually one way, like prioritizing the global south, indigenous people, but that's not the only one. It is important to invest more and more, especially for the capacity development for young people in the rural area. Yeah.
Thank you. I think from my perspective, I was curious about this question as well, but also take the Africa as an example. There are a lot of unelectrified households there, so definitely they have the intention to become electrified and to have a higher education, public health, etc., all these benefits. But they don't have the capacity. So I think in this context, definitely there will need to the global cooperation to either invest like the international funds into this region. But I don't think like this is a kind of long-term sustainable way. I think at the end of the day, definitely the market will need to be run itself. It means like also mentioning this morning sector, I think like finally private sector needs to come in. It's not only because they feel like they have the need, but also the private sector will feel like if I invest in these indigenous regions, I will benefit from that. My company will earn money from that. I think, but currently such kind of a mechanism haven't been established now, but I do feel like for the first step is the public sector to truly seed the very first seed into the markets and to help make progress either like the learning curve of the technology or to train the laborers locally so they couldn't have a lot of know-how knowledge on how to approach of all these technologies and like how to install the solar panels, how to maintain all these solar panels. And we need examples to show the local people, like if you install a solar panel on your household, what you will earn, you will have like light bulbs in the evening, you will have TVs, children will have a better education. All these, I think, all these cases need to be first implemented in these regions. And then we have an initial market, and then the private sector is coming in. So finally, the market could run itself. That's my vision about this question.
So the question is, for want of a better term, are ordinary young people engaged with this question? And by that I mean, do we have young people who are more middle class, more graduates, more professionals, like all of us sitting here, who are engaged in this process? What about the less educated, the factory workers, the farm workers, and the working class people, unemployed people? In other words, the ordinary young people. Do you think they are at all engaged with this issue, at all? You know, because Maria said there are different categories of young people, those who feel, oh, why were we born at such a bad time, and others who are fatalistic about it, others who want to do something about it. But are ordinary young people in any of those categories? Are they even, because, you know, the question is, why is the world not changing faster? I'll give you a good example. I come from South Africa. You find young people say, a big problem we've got with our government and why things are not going right is because the government is dominated by really old people. But 2/3 of our population is under the age of 36. So So in other words, at every election, young people can choose whoever they want to, but they don't. They choose the old people again. What do you think is happening amongst ordinary young? Maria, do you want to kick off with that?
Sure. What is happening with ordinary young people? Well, I probably have to emphasize what I said earlier, which is I think a lot of ordinary young people, I don't know how better term to use, are exhausted with the state of the economic conditions that they face, which I can't remember exactly what the statistic is, but it's something like our generation is the first generation which looks forward and sees that they will probably not have a higher standard of living than the previous generation. So to give an example of this, in the United States, right, we have a crippling problem with student loan debt. And so many people who are in their late 20s and 30s find themselves in a very different financial position than their parents did, where they're not able to afford to buy a house, get married, have children, even if they wanted to. They're still playing catch up on economic debt that they incurred as part of their education. So that's one group of people, right? But you asked about the sort of working class, the ordinary young people. I think that the cost of living and the cost of housing and the cost of food and the cost of transportation has created economic conditions where people are so focused on just getting by day to day that the larger calamity of climate change is something that they're aware of and they recognize is probably exacerbating the day-to-day issues that they face. But quite frankly, they're so focused on just getting by day to day that they're not thinking necessarily about how can I engage on this issue. I'm mostly speaking from the perspective of the United States and Western Europe, and so it's been a long time since I lived in Asia. I won't comment on that. I'll probably leave that to my fellow panelists. But I think in a lot of the developed world, there's a little bit of confusion about what the right thing to do is, because like I said, they're just so focused on figuring out how to get by day to day. The economic conditions and the ramifications of the global financial crisis are not over. They're just kicked down the road as we waited for interest rates to go back up and now come back down. And so we're all sort of figuring that out from an economic perspective. And that has a lot to do with, or that has a lot of influence on the way that people think about how they want to conduct their lives vis-a-vis climate change or anything else.
Yeah, I think it relates the things that I write down just now is that we call it like someone who are unlucky to have education, like young people who are unlucky to have educations. They are, what I write just now is they are fighting for their life. They are living for survive. They are surviving. While I am as young people, I'm lucky to have educations. I got scholarships, and that's why I could be here. I could speak up, and I don't need to think about like my basic thing, like food. It's already there. Like I had it, so I can think more about environment. I can think more about other things that makes the earth better, like more sustainable. And the issue is that I can say in my country, in Indonesia, maybe in the EU, like young people are shifting towards more plant-based diets because they think that it's more sustainable. Yeah, but in the reality in Indonesia, they don't even have money to afford meat. So they don't eat meat because they care about the environment, but they don't eat meat because they don't have money. They don't have enough access to protein. So it's also a big issue that is happening in the food security. Yeah.
I agree with these two panelists. I kind of feel like currently the young people, or if I understand correctly, the ordinary young people you are referring to are truly struggling about living a decent life, especially like after the COVID-19. A lot of people are struggling because the economics is not super good. And I think sometimes under such kind of pressure, people will lose the big picture. We will only focus on the daily life. So, but I truly feel like there should be something to be done to kind of change kind of current situation. One thing I'm thinking is like probably people are not intentionally to change their behavior to opt for the higher cost but low carbon choices. But probably we could design some like policy schemes. For example, like people will consume the plastics either way, like whether you have the policies in that, or if I'm rich or if I'm poor, I will use the plastics every day. But if we could have some like policy interventions into this, for example, we will have investments into all those compostable plastics. So all these products will reach the normal people's daily life. So they didn't change a lot of their behavior, their personal choice, but actually they are making a positive impact because they are not using those unsustainable products. I think such mechanism might be helpful to truly change, or to say, to reach the every people in the society to make a difference for the low carbon transition. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Since there are no hands and no questions, oh, there's a hand from a very young gentleman. Go ahead, yeah.
Well, I'm 54, but I consider myself young. Thank you. So it's apparent that the education is essential in all these issues, and so for each of the panels here, what is the one thing that you wish you were taught in your education system, or what is the thing that you wish would change in order for every young generation to participate more actively in this important issue?
Thank you very much. Several things pops up in my mind. Well, actually, we are already well educated in terms of environment, thanks to maybe the recent education in Japan. If we talk to like high school students, junior high school students, even with elementary school students, they know very well than their parents. So in that context, well, I think it's going to the right direction, at least. But for the practicing part is the question. So for example, in education, maybe you are taught that, this is happening, this might be the solution, etc., but that's not connected to the practical world. So maybe, for example, in my context of waste reduction, elementary school kids knows that, recycle is important, as a terminology, reduce is more important, they talk about it. But like, when it comes to the reality, what do you reduce? Yeah, they don't connect that with the mindset, okay, maybe I'll use my pencil more, nicely so that it can prolong the life. So that kind of connection is missing. So it's more about the how the learning can be connected to your real life is one thing. But aside from that, I would also like to add that definitely we are not learning as much from the history too. So the recent historical education in Japan is very missing. So that's something that I would also like to highlight on top of the environment or, this environmental related education. But thank you very much for the question.
Okay. So maybe for me, I feel like I already very privileged to receive the higher education. But I do feel like if I want to change one thing is that probably for all the disciplines, all the majors in the university, or even the lower level of the education, probably there should be like a very general, or I don't know how to say, very general courses regarding the sustainability and the low carbon education. Actually, because I feel like in the future, the low carbon transition, not only in the energy sector, but in the building sector, transportation sector, all these sectors are involved. So I think people in different majors, they should have such kind of climate mindset in their future works when they go into the every works of the life. And additionally, I think even for the social science, like for the arts, for the literature major, probably they also would want to get some education regarding the climate change. So probably they will play a role into the future of public awareness regarding this issue when they bring in the climate mindset into their future, like imagination or into their future works into that. So I think actually we are kind of observing such kind of changes because a lot of business schools, they are kind of educating the future leaders about how to do a better ESG, and also different schools, they are opening different new majors and courses. So I think the change is happening.
Good. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing that a bit missing is that in the education system, it is important, in this case in Indonesia, to provide some education in terms of entrepreneurial skills, social entrepreneur, social projects. Because in developing countries or the global south, there are a lot of issues. And actually, the issues is an opportunity for solutions. So I can share to you several examples, for example. Like when in Indonesia, we have a specific issue, for example, about palm oil and something. And there is a startup happening in my university that they are extracting the oil from the insect that is more sustainable, no need for land deforestations, and etc. That's actually a good example why it is important about the social entrepreneurship to be developed in the education system. Thank you.
Maria?
I think, I think my answer to this is really a hope that we would be able to educate people about the power of their own consumer choices. And that in order to tackle some of the most acute and obvious symptoms of climate change, whether that's water, deforestation, just the unbelievable trash problem that we have with single-use plastics. My fellow panelists talked a little bit about some of the food choices, making meat versus plant-based diet choices. I mean, all of these things come down to a basic, fundamental common denominator, which is your own personal choices have enormous ramifications when they're aggregated across a population. And I think that there's something really empowering about that, but the educational component behind that is really lacking. Like, people often say you vote with your dollar as much with anything else. And I think that that's true. Like, the things that you buy, the way that you engage with the world, whether it's from an economic, political, or social perspective, is really powerful. But if you don't understand the ramifications of your choices, then you might not understand how they will affect the world writ large. And so I think there's something really missing in our education system, at least as I've experienced it, in connecting your own personal choices with the larger things that you want to see changed in the world, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Ismail, will you give us a really good youth perspective?
Thank you. I'd like to say just two things. One is that youth in general, it's not so much being consistent between their own lifestyles and the bigger picture, but they have now a capacity to influence the general mood and thinking of countries. And I will point out just a stunning thing that the late Maurice Strong, who was Secretary General of both, the first UN session on the environment was in Stockholm in 1972. And as Maurice Strong said, he was Secretary General of that, he said there were only 3 heads of state and government. Now, 20 years later, in Rio in 1992, there were 114 heads of state and government. And what happened in between, in those 20 years? There was a useful general embrace of the idea of environment. And whereas in 72 in Stockholm, only 3 heads of state and government bothered to go to a UN conference, by 1992 and the Rio Earth Summit, all heads of state and government felt from the younger generation the movement, whether it was to save the whales or it was to protect the forest, or that was not. The main thing was that environment came as a major issue, primarily because youth spoke about it in the universities, in the schools, in demonstrations, in social media. And I think today, when I look back from 92 to today, the enormous expansion of social media means that the youthful generation has a lot more influence than it has ever had before. So that's number one. And I think number two is, since you're asking me from a useful perspective, I will read a slight poem by Robert Frost, who said, "When I was young, my teachers were the old. I gave up fire for form till I was cold. I suffered like metal being cast. I went to school to age to learn the past. Now when I'm old, my teachers are the young. What can't be molded must be cracked and spun. I strain at lessons fit to starch a suture. I go to youth to learn the future." And I think that's very appropriate.
Thank you very much. I think that brings us to a neat point where I can ask the panelists if you want to say in 30 seconds your last punchline as a wrap-up. I won't be saying anything after that, so you can have the last word. Let's start with Joko.
Okay, talking about the food choices by young people, we know about the demand and supply perspective that if the young people it's like not healthy, then the producer will always like produce more sweeteners product that is not healthy. I think it is important also to bring the big food industries in the table to talk about this, to raise their awareness about the food system, because currently we cannot say no to the big companies, because all the foods in supermarkets, in mini markets that we have, like in 7-Elevens, they are processed food produced by the big companies. So that's all the product that is produced by the company are sometimes like high in sugar, salt, and fat, and it's not good for the young people. That's why if I like become most influential people, I will bring the big companies to the table in contributing a more healthier of the food system. Thank you.
Probably I would want to say, like, currently it's the worst of the times because the climate change is super urgent, but it's also the best of times because we already witnessed a lot of progress in the technology, and it's super fascinating. And I think the young people are truly like our future to like transform the entire system with like a lot of new technologies and new methodologies, new policies. So I truly appreciate like kind of such opportunities offered to the young people, and I feel like I'm confident like all these young people could work together to bring a better future and to pass them on to the next generation.
Maria?
I guess what I would end with is just maybe a call to arms or a sincere request to the rest of my generation, which is that while it's very easy to be apathetic and it's very easy to be cynical and it's very easy to do nothing, I would really hope that we can find more commonalities with the people around the world who are dealing with similar issues that we are all dealing with wherever we are. That similarity is far more than the differences, and put aside other things that don't ultimately matter relative to the calamitous outcomes that could come from not mitigating some of the more acute effects of climate change in particular, but other things too. I think COVID-19 showed us all that we have a lot of shared experiences, or we can have a lot of shared experiences. And I hope that momentum to come together as people, as just human beings who all live on planet Earth and like to breathe air, drink water. I'd love to believe that we can channel that into finding ways to engage with each other, engage with policymakers, engage with business leaders, and figure out a way to tackle small problems first, because the bigger problems are always composed of smaller ones. So that's my hope.
All right. So, well, actually, the younger generations, including myself, actually tends to go to more of the rural communities to be committed in the rural area, because we can actually be engaged in the decision-making process if you're in the rural area. Sadly, in Japan, well, I really understand why Japanese people or younger people don't go to vote, because you don't see the influence of yourself. Government won't change. haven't changed for 50 years. So that's why actually working in the community level or working in the rural area, it's more like, it's like rebuilding our democracy. So that's what we feel. So that's why that kind of, rural movement or rural, transition movement is definitely a big power of the source. And then I really hope that you also, empower younger people to start practicing that. And then when they see the success there, then they might have more hope in the maybe national level, global level, etc. So that's what I really want to ask for everyone that, please support that movement. At the same time, during the program that we have for the Academy for even younger generation, we say that, well, we can't see the future, but we can create it. And that's what we can all say at this point. So thank you very much.